Okay, so today I'm going to do a video I've been thinking about for a long time, and that is going to be my standalone fantasy book recommendations video because I get this question a lot, and I think about this a lot, where what are good standalone fantasy books? Sometimes you don't want an epic series. Sometimes you have a family member you want to get into fantasy, and you're like, well, I cannot start them off on Mistborn. That's a 700-page book in a 3-book series. Sometimes you want to get someone into this genre, but you don't want them to have to commit to all of the books. So this was my list of what I think are great standalone fantasies from a pretty diverse genre spectrum in the fantasy space, and that I've enjoyed all of them. Or even if I didn't enjoy all of them, I know there's a reader out there for them, and let's get into it because I've got a lot. So we're going to start with my more like high fantasy, epic fantasy picks. So we're going to start with Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This is my fancy copy. I will put a different image up for one you'll see in your stores probably. Now, this is one of my favorite fantasy stories ever. This is about 3 characters on this world, and there's a city, Elantris. So what used to happen is at night the Shroud would come and bless a person, and they would go to Elantris, and they would be this great person who could do magic, help people, heal people, do great technology. And then one day everything changed, and the Shroud came, and you basically became this like undead, forever hurting zombie type creature. And this happens to one of our main characters, who happens to be the prince of this land. So you get to see Elantris through his eyes in this story and try and solve this mystery of how this world is the way it is. You have his betrothed fiance, wife, Serene, who is still somehow married to him through political nonsense, even though he's dead. Or at least no longer available. So she has to, in a new land, maneuver the politics, try to find her place. And she's always been someone who finds it hard to fit in. Not necessarily not like other girls, just more like a human that doesn't always fit in. And then you have Rathan. And he's from a far off land and has been sent here to try and convert everyone to his religion to try and save them, because if he doesn't, then his government is going to send an army to destroy everyone. So you have these 3 plots, these 3 characters, and they intermingle, and it's great. The pacing at the beginning for some people is a little off. I mean, my 17-year-old brain, when I first read it, loved it, and the ending is just like, it goes. But this was the first book published by Brandon Sanderson, and I still really, really love it. It doesn't have as much magic as his other series, but that also makes it a perfect book to give to someone who maybe is getting into fantasy and needs to be stepped into something more familiar, like a political book. This definitely has more political trappings than it does magic, and it's one of my favorites. Now, in a similar vein, my other Sanderson I will recommend is Warbreaker. Oh, Warbreaker. So this is what people call his princess book, or at least I've heard that from Justine from I Should Read That. So this is a book about Ciri and Vivenna, 2 sisters from a kingdom who originally Vivenna is engaged to this man to be married. The king, the God King, I think his name is. He's supposed to be this big monster. It's in this area where there are basically gods. There are people who, don't, when they die, they come back and they have a higher level of what's called breath, which is part of the magic system here. That's based off color and maybe awakening objects and seeing the world differently. It's part of their hierarchical system. And instead of Vivenna, who it was supposed to be Ciri, who's on the cover here, gets sent because her father is selfish and just couldn't part with Vivenna. Vivenna goes to save her sister regardless, so you have Vivenna trying to save Ciri, and Ciri, who's suddenly has a job and responsibilities, is trying to maneuver the politics of her situation. You have Lightsong, who's a god who doesn't want to be a god. It's really great. There's a talking sword. I freaking love inanimate objects that talk. So there's a lot in this that really sparks all of the things I love in fantasy. I think it's also a great bridge book for people who like read young adult. I like this way more than a lot of some of Sanderson's young adult works, but I think it scratches a similar itch for me, has some romance as well as Sanderson ever does romance. And yeah, currently both of these that I've mentioned from Sanderson are standalones, although they will become series one day, but they've been standalones for over 10 years, and they are complete solid stories. Like, I didn't even know they'd be series for a really long time. Similar vein, epic fantasy, we're going to talk about The Sword of Kaigen by Wang, which is quite possibly a near perfect book for me. This is the story of Misaki and her son, who live in the Sword of Kaigen, which is a part of the world where all of the warrior waterbenders live, and they basically practice their craft for the next war that might come. Misaki, as a young woman in her teenage years, was able to travel the world, and she had a much more reckless past, but she basically calmed down her life to be a wife and mother in this family of hers. Now her son is coming into his power, and he's very talented, but also very good at taking critique, which is like my favorite thing. I don't get enough talented characters who are like, oh, I should listen to you, and like, that's totally fine that I was wrong. Help me make it better. Gosh, I love that. So I love Misaki, I love her son, and then it also is tragic, absolutely tragic. It's a war story. And just this story's ability to take me through all of the emotions, to take me through all the highs and lows that I expect in an epic long fantasy series within 700 pages was astounding. The story that it meant to tell was told. I'm being vague about that just because I don't want to spoil the journey for you, but it is so good. You will laugh, you will cry, you will be connected to these characters so well. And the magic is so cool. I don't know how she did it. She is like 28, 27, and I need more. I need more bad. All right, another more epic fantasy is Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. So this is like a more classic read. At least that's what people say. It's from 1990. You decide if that's classic or not. But this is a story about a land who got into a rough spot with a sorcerer. So the sorcerer took away their name and their land. So he's the ruler of this land, and no one can hear the word Tigana unless they are from there. And so this is a story that takes place 13 to 15 years after this war ended, and you have a group of people from Tigana trying to right this wrong, trying to get their name back, trying to get the dignity of their land back. And it's complicated. You're following this group who's trying to like raise tensions to like make the political situation where they could get it back without falling into some other tyrant's hands. You have the tyrant himself who you get to meet, he is not a black and white villain. You have a person who is struggling with her need for revenge, but also her need to understand that things are complex and her relationship with the situation has changed and evolved. There's a lot in this story that I thought was done really well. We've taken a lot of classic fantasy things that I'm normally very tired of and added a deeper thematic meaning to them. I don't think it's a perfect book, but I think that if you're looking for that classic fantasy itch, but you don't want to read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, you don't want to read the entire Wheel of Time, you don't want to start the Realm of the Elderling series, you can read Tigana. Tigana's going to have the prose that you want from any of those authors, or more so Robin Hobb or Tolkien. And it's going to have those classic fantasy tropes that you're used to, but it's going to be a really solid standalone story that has politics, that has a soft magic system, that has epic moments. It was really well done, I felt. And the last epic high fantasy I'm going to talk about is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is probably not going to stay standalone if I was a betting woman, but currently it is, and that was one of the big selling points. It's this 800-page standalone story. And it's this big global story of good versus big bad. You have the East and West. The East worships celestial dragons. The West fears fire dragons. You have two main characters. One's more talked about than the other, but one's a dragon rider, and one is kind of almost a trained witch assassin type character. And you're following their storylines and how they interact with the politics of their worlds as everyone's trying to sort of come together to prevent the return of a really big bad. And that's the best way I can describe it, because it's very much an epic fantasy where there are lots of players, lots of point of views, lots of magic, lots of conflict. The ending, its mileage for you will vary depending on what you want from it, but I had a really fun time. I liked the different magic systems, I liked the different point of views, I thought it was an entertaining standalone. So if you can get past the fear of the size, it actually reads really quick in my opinion, and it's really fun. So switching gears, we're going to go into more like fairy tale retelling atmospheric stories, starting with the two by Naomi Novik, Uprooted and Spinning Silver. So, Uprooted is the Beauty and the Beast retelling, and Spinning Silver is the Rumpelstiltskin retelling. And let's talk about Uprooted first. So Uprooted is a story about Agnieszka, who gets chosen by the dragon to be taken away. So the dragon's a sorcerer who protects the town from this forest. And this forest is creepy and cool. It's a real creepy, cool forest. And she learns that she has this connection to an older form of magic that's kind of been lost. The sorcerer has his own relationship to magic, and it's more like... So, the way I saw it is like he's very formulaic, mathematical about his magic, and she was much more like artistic and freeform. And so they have very different styles, but they learn how to mesh that together and learn about the world, and this forest is weird. It kind of has like 3 acts, and you might have feel the beats of the first 2, like you've read them before, but I don't think you'll predict the 3rd act. It's really cool. I like the atmosphere, I like the friendships. There are things that I know understand when people say it rubs them the wrong way and they don't like it, but I read this book in 2 days and I love it. So, yeah. I've also had great luck giving this to friends who are people who maybe have only read young adult fantasy or romance fantasy. This tends to work really well with them. So if you have friends and you're trying to get them into fantasy, this is a really nice retelling standalone adult. Spinning Silver, I think, generally has less controversy in booktube around it. This is the Rumpelstiltskin one. You have actually this story, if I'm remembering. So this one I remember less well as Uprooted because I don't like it as much. But you have 3 female characters at different positions in life. The main character, the one that I'm going to call not Rumpelstiltskin, but she makes the deal with Rumpelstiltskin, is a Jewish girl who takes over her father's business as a moneylender, I believe. And so she's always been turning silver into gold, essentially. And you have a girl who lives on a farm with an abusive father, I believe. And then you have... Gosh, the 3rd one is always escaping me, but I think she's meant to be almost a princess? I could be wrong, but it's about these 3 women and their paths and how they intersect, and it's a really nice story. It's a great winter read. Wonderful winter read. It's one I need to reread, for sure. But great for that retelling vibe. In a similar space, Dark and Deepest Red by Anna-Marie McLermore. A great standalone atmospheric fairy tale retelling read. It takes place in 2 timelines, 500 years ago and today. The today timeline is at Briarwoods. I think it's in Texas. In this town, about a couple weeks every year, there's just like magic around. Because why not? It's great. And in this particular year, everyone's getting red shoes and it makes them happy and everything. And 500 years ago, there was this dancing plague. And this Romani family was blamed for it. And in present day, you have a Romani boy and a Mexican-American girl. And the Mexican-American girl ends up wearing red shoes that she made because the red shoes are from her family's shoe store. So she made her own, and she can't stop dancing in her shoes. So it's kind of about heritage, being other. You see these parallel stories. You're trying to uncover this mystery and this different attachment, and it's very atmospheric. I couldn't put it down. It's just beautiful, lyrical. I think it's done so well. I also learned a little bit because this is actually based either on a story or a real-life event that happened in the past in France. Because that's where the dancing plague in the story takes place, is in France. So I also recommend that. So now we're going to get into, like, I didn't know how to call these fantasy stories. They were just, like, unique and cool. So let's start with Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lords. This is, like, kind of... maybe I should have put with fairy tale, but it's like more folklore. And this is a Caribbean-inspired fantasy story where you have Pama, who has a husband who is a glutton. And she kind of runs away to her family to be free of him because he's just such an annoying person to be married to. And in the process, these, what are they called? The Jambi get involved with her life. And they give her a chaos stick, but they stole the chaos stick from a different Jambi. I'm pretty sure it's a different Jambi. No, the Indigo Lord. And so then the Indigo Lord is trying to get his chaos stick back from Pama. And this whole story, this whole journey, it's told in such a satirical voice. Like, I think the first page of it is so funny. A rival of mine once complained that my stories begin awkwardly and end untidily. I am willing to admit many faults, but I will not burden my conscience with that one. Like, she's such a funny narrator, and this story is just so fun, and I just had a great time. I'm definitely rereading this one day. It's great. I also want to talk about Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. So this is more of a contemporary urban fantasy, and this is a young adult that I think is great for adult audiences as well. And this is the story of Jam, who accidentally brings to life Pet, who is a monster hunter. Now, they live in Lucille, which is an island that shouldn't have monsters anymore. Monsters being societal monsters. Oppression and gun violence, domestic violence, etc. Like, those are monsters in this story. And so Pet comes to life, says, there's a monster, we need to go hunt it. And Jam's like, what? What do we do? I'm like 14. There shouldn't be monsters. The adults won't listen. And it's a great story. It's so well done. I've listened to the audiobook and I thought it was really great. There's just so much to like about it, and I highly recommend it as a standalone fantasy. The next one I'll talk about is definitely on that list of books that I don't love, but I do think has an audience and I think is worth exploring, and that is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So this is a great story if you like quests. So I'm not big on the quest plot arc. I'm not great at that. But this is a story of Cassiopeia, who accidentally awakens the god of death, a Mayan god of death, and they have to go on this journey to find bits of the god of death, or else the world is going to end as we know it. And also Cassiopeia might not make it. So there are some stakes. And so they're traveling across Mexico in the 1920s. So great setting that you don't get in a fantasy book, 1920s and Mexico. And they meet different creatures and people that are in Mayan mythology. So I don't know about you, but Mayan mythology is a mythology that has not been used in my fantasy books. So all of those things were done really well, and it's a really great standalone romp. I mean, my biggest complaint is I would have liked it to be maybe a little longer. And so if any of those things spark your interest and you just want a nice, short but enjoyable like quest story with, I don't know, some really fun characters and setting, Gods of Jade and Shadow is pretty great. And the last one for this unique setting, really had no idea where to put this book, is The Library at Mount Char. This book's insane. This book's weird. This book is really hard to describe. So I'm going to try. You have these children who all their parents died, and they're adopted by this eccentric old man who takes them into his library and teaches them all a book. And so our main character is the Book of Language, and she is on a revenge spree, and she is mad at her dad, and it's about that revenge plot. This reminded me a lot of the dark vibes of Umbrella Academy, but much darker. Like, I think Umbrella Academy is fun with its darkness, but this is like, these children are messed up because of this father figure, and the decisions this female protagonist makes are messed up. It's very gory at times, it's really dark, it's really nonsensical. Like, there are lions for, like, no reason. Like, well, actually a reason, but, like, there are random lions. Like, this is a contemporary, like, urban fantasy-ish book. It's very weird, but I really liked it. So if you want something weird that's standalone that you haven't read before, I recommend this book. You should read it. So now we're going to get into Greek mythology retellings, which I only have two, and they're by the same author, and maybe they don't count, but they're standalones, and I liked them. And that is Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller. I like Song of Achilles more, but I also really liked Circe. They're both very beautifully written. I think they're fun takes on these Greek myths that I grew up really loving, because I love Greek mythology. This is my poor baby. This is my version of Edith Hamilton's mythology. It was my dad's. It's all beat up. I should buy something new. But yeah, these are great retellings of those stories. So if you haven't heard about them, look them up. They are well loved. I don't think you need me to tell you. Two that I think that are worth looking into if you really like stories that talk about the love of stories are 10,000 Doors of January and The Starless Sea. Neither of these are favorites of all time for me, but they have their audience. They are gorgeous, atmospheric, and their themes of the importance of storytelling is very prevalent, and they're really pretty. I tend to recommend The 10,000 Doors of January more than The Starless Sea. It's a shorter book, and I think you can more consistently decide early on if you will like it. The Starless Sea, I think, depending on how much you care about endings that make sense, determines if you like the book. At least it did for me. So I have a review on that if you're at all curious. I have reviews for a lot of these books, so I will put those in the description in the cards if you care. But if you like atmospheric reads where it's just like, I'm a storytelling lover who wants to hear other characters interact with stories in these ways, both of those are great. And then also kind of ones that are more contemporary in vein and feel good is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Fredrik Backman, which some might argue is not a fantasy, but I think it is, where you have this young girl whose grandmother just passed away, and she's reliving or rethinking about all of the fairy tales they were told growing up from their grandmother. And she's seeing the connections between those stories and her real life. And I just find this fantastical world they created so cool, and I just think it deserves to be listed in the fantasy section. In a similar vein, the one I just finished is The House in the Cerulean Sea. Such a wholesome, warm hug of a book. I think I'm stealing that from Justine again. She wrote that out, and I'm like, yeah, that's what the book is. That's what I wanted when I picked it up. You have Linus Baker, who is this guy who goes to different orphanages for magical kids to make sure these orphanages are good. And he has to go to this island for a month, which is an extra special orphanage. And he falls in love with this family. And it's wholesome and great. So if you want a more like wholesome contemporary vibe, where you still get to touch on some heavier topics, but it's like generally a pretty fun experience, I would recommend those too. So yeah, these were a bunch of standalone fantasy books. Hopefully there's one in there that works with your reading tastes or what you want from fantasy. If you have any recommendations, please let me know in the description down below. I am always looking for more fantasy reads that are standalones. I mean, I love my epic series, but I sometimes just want a good standalone as well. Other than that, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.